Alfonso Cahero, A Journey into Finance History, Chapter 49, Fall of the Soviet Union and Economic Transition, 1991. The year was 1991, and the Soviet Union stood on the brink of a cataclysmic shift. For decades, it had been a behemoth, a force in global politics, and a symbol of communism. But now, cracks had begun to show in the colossal structure, and the entire world watched as it teetered on the edge of collapse. In the heart of Moscow, Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union, sat in his office in the Kremlin, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The once unshakable empire he presided over was unraveling, and he was caught in the eye of the storm. Gorbachev had introduced policies like glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, in a desperate bid to reform the system. But instead, these changes had accelerated its downfall. The Soviet economy was in shambles. The state-controlled system that had driven industrialization was now a heavy chain, stifling innovation and efficiency. Shortages of basic goods were common, and the citizens' frustration had reached a boiling point. Protests erupted in the streets of Moscow and other major cities, and the once all-powerful Communist Party was losing its grip. In the countryside, farmers struggled to meet quotas imposed by the government. Alexei Ivanov, a farmer from a small village in Siberia, remembered the days when the collective farms seemed like a good idea, but now he saw the reality: inefficiency, corruption, and poverty. Alexei's family had worked hard, but it never seemed to be enough. The promise of a better life under socialism was a distant dream. Meanwhile, in the Baltic states, the push for independence was gaining momentum. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania had never fully accepted Soviet rule, and now their desire for freedom was unstoppable. In Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, a young activist named Lena stood on the steps of the parliament building, waving her nation's flag. She had joined the independence movement a year earlier, inspired by a dream of a free and democratic Lithuania. As the Soviet Union weakened, the other republics watched closely. Boris Yeltsin, the charismatic leader of the Russian Republic, sensed an opportunity. He saw Gorbachev's struggle and knew that the future lay in a different path. Yeltsin, with his bold vision and populist appeal, was ready to challenge the old guard. On a cold December day, as snow blanketed the Kremlin, Gorbachev made a decision that would change the course of history. He announced his resignation, acknowledging that the Soviet Union could no longer exist as it had. The world held its breath as he signed the document that formally dissolved the Union. In the aftermath, confusion and chaos reigned. The 15 republics that once made up the Soviet Union now faced the daunting task of building new nations from the rubble. The transition from a centralized, planned economy to a market-driven one was fraught with challenges. Hyperinflation, unemployment, and crime surged, leaving millions struggling to adapt to the new reality. In the heart of Moscow, a young entrepreneur named Dmitry saw an opportunity amidst the turmoil. With the state's grip loosening, private businesses began to emerge. Dmitry started a small trading company, navigating the volatile landscape with determination and grit. He faced obstacles at every turn, from corrupt officials demanding bribes to the sheer unpredictability of the market. Despite the hardships, there was a sense of hope. People like Dmitry, Alexei, and Lena believed in the possibility of a better future. The fall of the Soviet Union marked the end of an era, but it also signaled the beginning of a new chapter in history. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in decades, there was a glimmer of freedom and possibility. As the dust settled from the collapse of the Soviet Union, the people of the former republics faced an unprecedented struggle for survival. The transition to a market economy was chaotic, and the social fabric that had held society together for decades was unraveling. Across the vast expanse of the former Soviet Union, families grappled with uncertainty and hardship. In Moscow, the streets were bustling with activity, but the energy was different. The state-run stores that once doled out rations were replaced by makeshift markets, where vendors sold everything from second-hand clothes to homemade food. Dimitri's small trading company was one of many new businesses trying to navigate the unpredictable waters of capitalism. He worked tirelessly, often late into the night, making deals and finding new opportunities. One day, Dimitri received a visit from an old friend, Sergei, who had once been a high-ranking official in the Communist Party. Now, Sergei was out of a job and desperate. He asked Dimitri for work, but the young entrepreneur had little to offer. The encounter was a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes could change in the new Russia. In the rural areas, life was even harder. Alexei Ivanov's farm was struggling to stay afloat. The collective farms had been disbanded, and land was being privatized, but the process was slow and confusing. Many farmers, including Alexei, lacked the resources and knowledge to manage their newly acquired plots effectively. The infrastructure was crumbling, and essential supplies were scarce. Despite the challenges, Alexei refused to give up. He began experimenting with different crops, hoping to find something that would yield a better harvest. His wife, Natalia, took on additional work in a nearby town, cleaning houses to make ends meet. Their children helped with the farm chores after school, their young faces etched with determination. In Lithuania, Lena's dreams of independence had come true, but the reality of nation building was daunting. The new government faced enormous economic challenges, and the people were growing impatient. Lena continued her work as an activist, advocating for social reforms and better living conditions. She organized community meetings where people could voice their concerns and find ways to support each other. One evening, as Lena walked home from a meeting, she encountered a group of young men loitering on the street. They were members of a new gang that had emerged in the power vacuum left by the collapse of the Soviet Union. Crime rates were soaring, and many young people, disillusioned by the lack of opportunities, were turning to illegal activities. Lena's heart ached for them, knowing that their anger and frustration stemmed from a deep sense of betrayal. In Kiev, Ukraine, the atmosphere was similarly charged. The Chernobyl disaster of 1986 had left a lasting scar on the nation, and the economic collapse only deepened the wounds. People were desperate for change, but the path forward was unclear. Amidst the turmoil, a young journalist named Oksana started a local newspaper, determined to give a voice to the voiceless. She reported on the struggles of ordinary people, exposing corruption and advocating for transparency. Oksana's work was dangerous. She received threats from powerful figures who wanted to silence her, but she persisted, fueled by a fierce sense of justice. One night, as she worked late in her small office, she received an anonymous tip about a corrupt politician siphoning funds meant for public welfare. It was a risky story, but Oksana knew she had to pursue it. The economic transition was a brutal process, marked by hyperinflation and unemployment. Savings were wiped out overnight and pensions became worthless. The black market thrived, and bartering became a common way to acquire goods. People traded everything from clothes to furniture in a desperate bid to survive. Despite the hardships, there were glimmers of resilience. Communities came together to support one another, sharing what little they had. In the face of adversity, new leaders emerged, determined to steer their countries towards a better future. Dmitri, Alexei, Lena, and Oksana were among those who refused to be defeated by the chaos. They embodied the spirit of a new generation, ready to rebuild and reclaim their destinies. In the rural areas, life was even harder. Alexei Ivanov's farm was struggling to stay afloat. The collective farms had been disbanded, and land was being privatized, but the process was slow and confusing. Many farmers, including Alexei, lacked the resources and knowledge to manage their newly acquired plots effectively. The infrastructure was crumbling, and essential supplies were scarce. Despite the challenges, Alexei refused to give up. He began experimenting with different crops, hoping to find something that would yield a better harvest. His wife, Natalia, took on additional work in a nearby town, cleaning houses to make ends meet. Their children helped with the farm chores after school, their young faces etched with determination. In Lithuania, Lena's dreams of independence had come true, but the reality of nation building was daunting. The new government faced enormous economic challenges, and the people were growing impatient. Lena continued her work as an activist, advocating for social reforms and better living conditions.
She organized community meetings where people could voice their concerns and find ways to support each other.